I don't know exactly when Putnam's decline began, but I know when it ended. The day in 2006 when the Georgia Department of Transportation issued a new state highway map. It omitted Putnam and more than 500 other communities. Putnam, once the center of a well-populated agricultural district in West Georgia's Marion County, suddenly ceased to exist. Until that moment of cartographic annihilation, anyone using a Georgia map could see a hamlet called Putnam existed between Ellaville and Buena Vista on Georgia Highway 26. Curious travelers might contemplate the origin of Putnam's name, what it was like during its heyday, and what caused its demise. In March 2011, me and my two teenage boys were on the way home from a camping trip to Reed Bingham State Park in South Georgia. Wishing to avoid Atlanta, we took a cross-country route that led to Ellaville and then west. We had a 1996 state highway map, so we could see that we were passing through Putnam. At the time, I was telling the boys about Chinaberry, an exotic species of tree once widely planted on farms in the American South. It is not particularly attractive tree, to my way of thinking, but it is common. So common that it sometimes ended up in famous photos, like this one taken by Dorothea Lange in North Carolina in 1939, and these on the grounds of the old house in Putnam. Chinaberries can be toxic to humans and can make birds that ingest the berries act drunkenly. The boys seemed interested, so I pulled over when I saw chinaberries at the old home place in Putnam. What really caught our eye that day in Putnam was the abandoned old house, built of white brick in an affluent country manor style that whispered, "Prosperity once was known here." It had since fallen into disrepair. A gaping hole in the roof, curtains blowing in glassless windows, and plaster and trash littering sagging floors indicated that hard times had arrived suddenly and not that long ago. The lawn's lush grass dazzled on the pretty late winter afternoon. The yard was impressive. On one side of the house, bees buzzed actively around fragrant white blossoms of pear and apple trees. Gay yellow daffodils nodded beside the sidewalk. Festive wisteria draped over one side of the house and on several trees. The bright red berries and glossy foliage of nandina bordered the front porch. Crepe myrtle and magnolia held a promise of summer blooms, and limbs of gray-barked pecan trees arched over the lawn, promising a tasty nut crop that autumn. Curious about the property's history, I jotted down a telephone number from a faded for sale sign on the front lawn. A week later, I dialed the number from my office and spoke to the owner of the property. He told me all about Putnam, the heights it had reached, and the factors that contributed to its decline. My grandfather, Charlie Snyder, owned the property for many years, Mr. Snyder began. He had about 8 families living here. They were hired hands who basically worked for a place to live and for something to eat. Times were hard. Cotton then was the main crop, but then the federal government became entangled in agriculture in new ways that directly, though unintentionally, contributed to Putnam's downfall. Granddaddy was a cotton farmer, Mr. Snyder told me. Of course, he raised peanuts and corn too, but his money crop was cotton. The corn was mainly to feed the mules and cows. Then the government put a quota on cotton and told Granddaddy how much he could plant. Papa went ahead and planted like he'd always done, and the government wouldn't give him a marketing card needed to sell the cotton. He had to bring it back and store it in the old barns. The proud old farmer eventually called it quits. That's when Papa retired, Snyder explained, because he couldn't live with the cotton allotment rules. He quit and sold all his mules and told all the folks that were living on the place that they'd have to leave. When Snyder's mother and father died about 2 years apart, estate complications tied up ownership of the property for years so that the house remained vacant. Their adult children had moved away, so nobody was left there to tend the property. Mr. Snyder told me it stayed empty until the thieves pretty much went through it and took everything out of it. Indeed, the house looked beyond fixing when my sons and I visited in March 2011. We sometimes wonder if anyone restored it or if it's gone now. Vanished. Just like Putnam. But not entirely forgotten.